Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our final Music 104 online tutorial. Today, your first foray into the wild, wonderful world of chromaticism. So chromaticism is where people usually start to get a little panicky, but I am going to encourage you not to do so because it's actually quite a bit easier than you might think at first. So we're going to start with the most important thing to know about chromaticism, what I like to call the chromatic maxim, where tonal music is concerned. And that is that chromaticism embellishes tonal functions, it does not change them. So in other words, whatever you would already have there, chromaticism just decorates a little bit further. It doesn't fundamentally change any relationships that we've examined up until this point. So let's take a look at what that means in practical matters. So we're going to start by looking at the melodic roots of the 5/7 or 5 chord, which is what we would call an applied chord. It is a chord that is applied as a dominant to another chord in a diatonic context. Let's start by just looking at at a diatonic progression that moves from scale degree 4 to scale degree 5, so a predominant to dominant progression. As we would have normally, it would look like this, right? So if I don't have a keyboard with me, but I'll just say this is do, 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 mi, sol, mi, do, mi, fa. So we go fa, sol, right? Very typical progression. We've heard it about 1,000,000 times so far, and we've sung it maybe 2,000,000 times. Now, if we're going to add chromaticism to this, we're not going to change the fa, sol. We're not going to change that. We're just going to add a passing tone between the fa and the sol. There's not very much room to do that, so you've guessed it, we're going to F sharp. So it's simply what we would call a chromatic passing tone going up by half steps. So here we would have do, mi, fa, fa, fi, sol. And the proper syllable is fi, since we're raising our fa. So fa, fi, sol, do, like that. So a chromatic passing tone, and what it does is it essentially extends the predominant area by a beat, because this is an embellishment. We don't have the dominant area yet, so our brains have latched on to the notion of predominant in our syntax, so it's just an extension of predominant into the dominant arrival on 5. So this is how the bass line is going to be moving. Okay, so let's take a look at what this, note your scale degree 4 before we move on. So that raised scale degree 4, very important. This is the only raised scale degree we're going to be looking at in this particular tutorial and in this entire course. You will see many more of those in 203 and 204 next year. But for now, only raised scale degree 4, moving towards scale degree 5. So let's take a look at how this works with chords. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a given chord, a 4-chord predominant chord that we've already got, and then we're just going to do like we did in the last example. We're going to raise that root by a half step and then move on to scale degree 5, right? So exactly the same bass line that we just saw. However, there's one thing you're going to notice, that I've added an extra member to the middle chord here. I've added a 7th. Why have I done this? Well, I could just go from the 4 chord and then sharpen the F, in which case I would have F sharp A C, and then move straight to 5. However, in common practice period music, it was exceedingly rare to use a diminished chord in root position, just a diminished triad, sorry, in root position. So the 7th was always considered much more acceptable. The level of crunch increased and didn't make the tritone quite so apparent, frankly. So this, by adding the 7th, or scale degree 3 in this case, we make this chord more palatable, and it becomes a 5/7 in the key of 5, which we also call just 5/7 of 5. You'll note the nomenclature there. 7/7, 7/7 of 5. So 7/7 7/5 is the written nomenclature, and what that means is it's 7/7 in the key of 5, or in this case, since we're in C major, the key of 5 is G major, right? So that's why we have another way of determining why we have that F sharp, because we're borrowing that F sharp from G major, essentially. Okay, so let's give this a listen to. This is a particularly good progression to use at a half cadence, and oftentimes that's where you're going to see it, because it is marks a very strong arrival at the 5 chord without really contesting the C major key area. It just sort of sharpens our arrival at 5, if you want to think of it that way. But there's a particular factor about this 7/7/5 chord that makes it quite suitable to moving to a cadential 6/4. Take a look at how this is written out and see if you can figure out what it is about the 7/7/5 that makes the cadential 6/4 such an obvious goal. Take a second. You got it? Well, if you guessed that it was because there are 2 common tones, then you would be correct. So the C and E, scale degrees 1 and 3, are common tones between these 2 chords. So that makes the voice leading really smooth. As the F sharp and the A collapse onto G, the other 2 just stay exactly where they are. And then we move into a 5/7, which, as I've always said, is a more common dominant chord than just straight up old 5. So let's give this one a listen to. And I'm not giving you a resolution. Ha 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 ha. Okay, I'm lying because I'm going to give you some on the next page. So here we go. Let's take a look at this in context. So this, if you want to think of this 4/7/7/5 cadential 6/4/5/7 progression as being a bit of musical syntax that we can kind of click in like a puzzle piece into other bits of different musical syntax, that's probably a good way of thinking about it. So on the top, you're going to see a bunch of smaller staves that have tonic expansion progressions in them. And then since we arrive at a 5/7 at the end of our main bit here in the middle, we have 2 possible choices, right? We can either resolve back to 1, like we do in the bottom left corner, or we can do a deceptive move to a 6 chord in this case, although it could be a 4/6 in any other context. And then that would carry on until we finally return back to 5 and then ultimately came back to 1. So what I want to illustrate is not an exhaustive set of examples of ways that you can incorporate this chord progression, but just several possible ways with a few different bits of musical syntax. The point being that this 7/7/5 doesn't fundamentally alter our understanding of the predominant function. And I just noticed that there's a mistake on this page. The dominant starts under the 7/7/5, which is incorrect. That should start under the cadential 6/4. Predominant should cover 4 and 7/7/5, because 7/7/5 is considered a predominant, a chromatic predominant in this case. My apologies. So here's one particular path, so you can think of this sort of as a choose your own adventure. Here's one particular path. We can start in the upper left corner and move down through our predominant and dominant functions, and then simply resolve to tonic immediately after that. Let's give that a listen to. Okay, so our next possibility would be to take this longer tonic expansion passage where we have a few extra chords and start there into our, from there into our predominant, and then from our predominant again resolving directly to from the dominant function at the end of this, resolving directly into one again like this. So the paths outlined by the green arrows. Let's listen. Another path we could take through this particular scheme is to start where we did at the beginning, from the top left corner, move through our the bit of syntax that we're studying today, the predominant and chromatic predominant and dominant, and then go to a deceptive resolution, which then loops back to 5 and a final resolution on tonic. And last but not least, we can then start from our expanded bit of tonic function, go to our predominant and dominant syntax that we're studying today, and then move through a deceptive motion at the end, circling back to 5 and then coming back to 1. What I hope these examples have illustrated is that there are lots and lots of different ways of assembling a musical phrase. Much like one of those old General Lego sets that I used to play with as a kid, you can sit down with the blocks and turn them into just about anything that you want, but you still need to have a certain shape for everything to make sense. So we still need to follow the tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic syntax, but we can approach that syntax by sort of messing around with all of the various contents of each category without fundamentally altering the categories themselves. And I hope that you also realize that chromaticism in this particular case doesn't really do much other than heighten a sense of arrival at our scale degree 5 or our 5 chord. In fact, it really just colors the predominant area, intensifying the arrival at 5, but in really no way changing the basic tonic predominant dominant syntax that we've been studying since the beginning of the term. The sharp 4 can be thought of as a note that's borrowed from G major, the 7th scale degree of G major, or you can just think of it as a chromatic passing tone passing between F and G, whatever floats your boat. Okay, so that is the end of our last tutorial for the semester. Thank you very much for your patience with all of this. This has been my first experience teaching online, and I hope I haven't made too much of a mess of it. So it's certainly been fun to be able to put these things together. I hope they've been useful, and I hope you've learned something despite the stressful and difficult circumstances we've been in over the last few weeks. I've certainly got to say that I've been impressed with the work that y'all have been handing in, and I think that speaks very well for all of you and your ability to remain focused and disciplined under difficult circumstances that will serve you all very well as musicians as you go forward in your careers. Okay, last bit of business. We've got some upcoming submissions. So week 14 singing activity videos will be due. It says upload here, but that's incorrect. Just send them to me as YouTube links on Monday, April 27th. We'll also have week 14 transcriptions. Those you will upload to Blackboard also on Monday, 27 April. I've decided, after having thought about it, that I don't want to do any final check-ins. I think we've all had enough. It's been stressful enough as it is. But what I will allow you to do is to submit any missing homework from 16 March on. So that's any homework that was handed in on or after 16 March. So that's when we went to an online format by May 4th at class time. You may do so by sending me an email with the missed assignments. This is just to take into account the fact that people have had difficulty getting everything to me because of internet access issues and illnesses and possible illnesses in the family or other just difficult personal circumstances that have arisen out of the extreme circumstances we have found ourselves in over the last few weeks. So no final check-ins again, but you may submit any homework that you have not submitted that was due on or after the 16th of March. Anything that was before 16th of March that was not handed in has to be counted as not handed in, unfortunately. All right, thank you very much. And as usual, we're going to do our credits here. A new set of credits for you today and a picture of both cats together, which only really ever happens as we start moving into summer, and they both cannot resist sharing the sunbeam together. Again, it's been quite an adventure with you all in these last few weeks. Thanks for bearing with me, and I hope that your end of semesters are reasonably peaceful. Stay home, stay safe, and stay sane. This is Dr. E signing out.